Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you. We are coming to you live today from outside the state capitol. My guest is Senator Julia Kirt. Hello, Senator.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. We are doing this episode outside with video at the Capitol because this is one of 6 lovely days that we get each year. And also, there's a budget deal.
Yeah. Yep.
Or some semblance thereof.
Correct.
And so we wanted to talk about that a little bit today.
Great.
Does that sound okay?
Yep.
It's always weird doing live recordings because I'm not sure if I should look at you, but if you're listening to this, both, right?
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this in a traditional podcast app, you don't know that it's on video. But you can go to our YouTube channel and watch this, which is equally delightful. We decided to set up in the shade rather than the sun of the parking lot. There's also some sort of event, perhaps a graduation.
Yeah,
there's some
always things happening up here. It's a fabulous building.
And so over off-screen stage left, you may hear music. We heard music. There may be a sound check happening. We'll roll with it. We'll just make it.
It's actually really kind of, that's what policy making's like up here. There's people in and out of the building. There's people having events. They have no idea wherever they're making a state budget.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're just having their wedding or their quinceañera photos, you know?
Right. We don't get in their way.
That's right. I photobomb them, you know.
Sure. I do love that element of being at the Capitol where there is always something happening. You never know what to expect. You might come for one event and then run into people from another event or two. And I like that people are using the people's house.
Yeah, agreed. The renovation to the building was fabulous, beautiful. There's finally actually a public multi-purpose room. There wasn't before. That's huge. Like, this is the people's building. Like, we can't treat it like it's our clubhouse, and so I'm glad when people use it. It's not, I will say there's some complexities around scheduling events in the Rotunda now because the House and Senate control the space.
Right. Instead of OMES, who used to control.
OMES manages, but House and Senate have to sign off on your event in Rotunda area now.
Both sides? Getting both sides to agree on anything, as we'll discuss, is often problematic.
It's just another layer, we'll say.
Yes. And the... during the renovations, I got to learn a little bit about the bicameral joint custody of this building and some of the complexities with that. And so I think, the team that Trey Thompson, when he was running that, and the team that worked on the renovation did an outstanding job. It looks great. It is just so beautiful now.
Yeah. I will have to add, since this ties to the budget, we have not yet actually fixed the problems that led to the building falling into disarray. So this has been one of my just tiny little soapboxes that I've been pushing and trying to improve over the years. Is we spent $280 million, I think, to renovate and to fix this building, make it accessible. But we don't have any budgeting or master planning system, right? It's still like, the House has these spaces, governor has these, and we each have our own little authority fiefdoms.
Yes.
And there's not a unified decision-making body, which means we're not planning for when do we need to change out the heat and air and when do we need to fix the roof. And that makes me frustrated because to me that's a symbol of dysfunctional government.
Sure, yeah. That's deferred maintenance, right? If we don't make a plan for that, and we'll talk about this in a minute, then we'll end up in the same place in another 100 years.
Yeah. Or fewer.
Or assuming our democracy lives that long. Who knows, right? Who makes it? My hope was today we would talk a little bit about both the process and the product of the budget. So maybe we'll talk about process first, because I think that helps kind of set the context, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the stuff. I will play the role of the constituent here, since I am your constituent.
Yeah, that's right.
At least for a few more weeks. We're moving. Do you know this? I thought
you were staying our neighborhood.
We'd like to stay there if we can.
Okay. Yeah, I'm hoping you do.
We can talk
I've lost a couple of constituents lately, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah, we can. We'll talk offline about if you know any properties going for sale soon. And just for anyone who's watching at home, I'm controlling our camera with my iPad here, and so if I'm looking at that a lot, it's not you, it's me.
Okay,
is that fair?
Fine. I brought
You
my budget notes. So.
This looks like your TikTok video budget notes. So, and a spreadsheet. That's excellent. Great. We'll get into that in a second. Well, let's, Senator, let's start by talking about the process. early in session, Senator Treat came out early and said, hey, we're going to do a transparent, I'm going to use air quotes, but I mean those halfway, transparent budget process this year. And I think it has gone definitely different than in the past. Mm-hmm. It has been more transparent, right? There's always areas for improvement, but I think on the whole, it's been much different. And by that, he meant most of the budget meetings were held in public with reporters there, live streamed. It was much more accessible than the traditional backroom deals. And at the table were negotiators from both chambers, but just from one party, right? There weren't...
At the end, yeah.
Were there any Democrats involved in this at all?
Yeah. So, I mean, So we've been calling for this for years. I mean, I know your listeners are people who want to see more transparency here. House and Senate Democrats have for years been calling this out because we would just get surprise bills, gargantuan budget ideas coming off the copier to the meeting where we voted on them. Used to be that we would get a budget, $13 billion budget, the same hour that we were voting on it, things like that. So, very much undermining our ability to vet these bills and these ideas. This year, I mean, it has been a big change, and we've gotten to contribute, I would say, through the subcommittee process on the Senate side. I would say we had more involvement, more agency. We were kept in the loop as we went. The House was not, but they got informed through us because our process was more informational. There were more House members and more Democratic House members that were informed as well, which was an interesting byproduct.
Yeah.
I think the difference is, though, and towards the end, what really happened and what people saw visually was the governor called the negotiators to the table. That's the picture everybody saw of the table of white men, mostly sitting around the table making that. That was the governor's call. He brought them together. He invited the press, did not invite the minority party. So Senator Floyd and I went to the first one, as did Representative Blancett from the House, because we were like, okay, the press is invited. Should the minority party be there?
Sure.
But I got to say, it was pretty aggravating to sit there, not have access to the handouts, not be able to contribute. So I just watched others remotely, because then I could look at the spreadsheets and didn't need to sit there and feel like I'm sitting on my hands,
Right.
So my point is, way better. I don't expect surprises in JCAB on Monday, which is really wild.
Right.
But did we fundamentally get to alter the foundation of the budget? No. I mean, the budget came to us already fleshed out. We got to help with some of them pushing this back and forth, smaller decisions and priorities, and we were more informed earlier.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And I think, obviously we're a nonpartisan organization, but just to call a spade, there was a photo on social media, I think from the Senate Democratic Caucus or someone that had shared it where it showed you and Leader Floyd off to the side, and being the only women in the frame and the only Democrats in the frame. It was a stark reality check, I think, for a lot of people to realize, this is better, but still has a long way to go.
The funny thing was, people were so frustrated, and that's not why it was there. I had some people say we did it for a photo op. I was like, no, we were trying to attend the meeting,
right.
But there was no place for us at the table. We were not invited. We came because it was supposedly a public meeting. But that's who's making the decision always. People are surprised by it, but I'm like, no, this is still who the top leadership is. We have had a chair of appropriations on the House and Senate side that have been women in the past. But that's about it. We haven't had women in these top leadership positions, and it is almost all white people.
Yeah. Well, and when y'all were in the room, was there ever an opportunity that anyone leaned back and said, Senator Kirt, what do you think?
No, it was a really awkward meeting, I'll say, first of all, because the first one especially, there was a lot of bravado and a lot of theater to it. And so I think they were uncomfortable we were there. They didn't know what to do with us because they were already kind of triangulating with the House. And so it was pretty awkward. I tried to get Senator Floyd to go whisper in Treat's ear, but she wouldn't do it.
Slip a sheet of paper up there.
Act like we were involved. But no, there wasn't an opportunity for that. So that was the end. That was the end of the negotiations when that happened. So I think a lot of people saw that part. We did participate as much as we were able. But I'll say, there's meetings that happen. And I'm not saying everything has to happen in public.
Right.
Transparency, realistically, every single visit to a site or discussion of a possible item doesn't need to be. The positive parts of it were we had JCAB meetings in April where we really were deciding, should this get budgeted at this level? If we pass this bill, that means it's going to be in the budget. Are you guys okay with that? And we were talking about, is this water project more important than the dam project? Is this more important than that? Now, did I get to pick which bills were being discussed? No, but we got to help them kind of decide some of them, what was going to move forward.
Right. Yeah, I think that's, for me, like one of the starkest realities is that, well, the budget conversations, it felt like it started earlier in session this year than normal. And I know that they're always kind of happening behind the scenes, but we were a little more privy to it. Now, one of the other things that was different this year was that Senator Treat said, hey, the Senate's going to have a transparent process for all those meetings in public. And the House didn't necessarily make the same pledge. And then somewhere along the way, they developed this budget portal, like a spreadsheet website, right? That you could presumably go to and review. Yeah. It's obviously like very dense, as a state budget is.
Yeah.
So it wasn't super like accessible to the everyday citizen. And even during the negotiations, like in the room, if you were watching online, like I was one of those geeks that watched, or following, Trace Savage's live tweeting, which I thought was very informative about the subcontext of what's happening there, the subtext of what's happening in the room, that there was like a battle over who's putting what on the screen and like how that's going to play out.
That it did give people a sense in real time of what actually happens, which you have two different bodies of people who are decision makers, two different staff. They have different spreadsheets. They do things in a different way.
Sure.
And people think, oh, you could unite them. Well, but you have separate leaders. And so it's kind of hard. Like if this appropriations chair in the Senate says, I really want to have these line items listed this way, that's kind of what that staff has to do because that's their boss, right? So, I mean, it just shows that humans working together is not a simple thing. Like everything from what are you going to name things? How are you going to list them? What order are you going to review them? Like, are you going to call this money a recurring expense or a one-time expense? Like those kinds of things are all having to be discussed. And I think it gives you a sense of like, it's not, anyone who says it's simple, it's not. Right. It's not simple at all.
No, right. And I mean, I was talking to our fellow about this earlier. She was reading all the news articles about this and I was like, hey, read all these and tell me what you think. And we'll come into that in a second. But she was like asking questions like, what's the, she's 19, she's new. She's like, what's the quick action closing fund? What's, there's
so many short, like
little things.
I'm 6 years in and I'm kind of the budget geek of my caucus and there's things I don't understand.
Right.
So like it's all these shortcuts or previous discussions or disagreements or previous things that didn't work. And like, if you haven't been following the budget for multiple years, it would be very hard to follow. I mean, like Representative Wallace, who's the chairman on the House side, he's been doing this 6 years and he was vice chair before that. Like he knows what he's doing and he knows his stuff really well. So like, if you're not fluent, you're going to be like trying to catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hang on 1 second.
Hi. I'm coming over to see what Let's Fix This is about.
Oh, civic engagement, getting people to vote.
Oh, that's a biggie.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, listeners. This is part of the fun of recording live is that we were out here and a couple of constituents, not from around here, but from another part of the state, walked up just to say hi and gave Senator Kirt and I a chance to talk to them about what's going on with them. They're concerned about local corruption. Who knows? Like you just hang again, as we were saying earlier, you hang out at the state capitol, you never know what else is happening.
Right, and they're hoping for relief at the state level for things that are happening in their city, which is interesting. It's always tough because it's like we have these local governance and what issues happen and are decided at the local level versus the state level.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was a great conversation, and I've totally lost where we were, so we'll just jump back in.
Great.
Wherever it makes sense. And
we can stop talking about process and move on.
Yeah, so I was going to say, let's move on from we've we talked about the portal, the House portal, and the challenges. And I think I was going to make a point that and talking to Ava, our fellow, about the budget process, that the other members of the caucus, like the speaker and the pro tem, aren't really their boss. Like they're the elected leader of the caucus. This is you. You're the leader elect for the Democratic caucus, but you're not like, you don't have any technical jurisdiction over those folks.
No, we
which
are
is part of what
independent agents.
yeah, which is to me, for most of us who like work in offices and we've got a boss and a boss's boss and maybe some subordinates, and there's a chain of command that has like HR consequences, and that is not the case in elected office. That the HR consequence, air quotes, is voters that would vote somebody out. I mean, there's
Right, or burning bridges in the building and then you can't get anything done.
Yes,
but it takes pretty severe. No, it is a very strange. It's like having cousins, but you also have all this power and pressure and attention simultaneously.
Right.
I've decided it's like family, because when someone's elected, you have them with you until they're not elected anymore.
Yeah.
And it could be 12 years. So it's
Right.
like family.
That's true. Yeah, whether you like them or not, you're related.
However dysfunctional.
That's
Yeah.
true. Well, it's the longer that I do this work, the more nuanced and, to me, interesting it is. It can be frustrating at times, and I'm honestly in these uncertain times, or however certain they might be, I'm trying hard to like find the intellectual stimulation about process and the humor, if I can. Right, like it's easy to go down the dark lane of like anger and frustration and outrage and some stuff, and so trying to like pull back and be like, hey, some of this stuff is, like could be kind of entertaining, not in like a Roman Colosseum entertain me way, but like
Right.
there's something that is engaging about it, and for me at least, and I hope some of our listeners, that it provides a lens to like explore a topic like the state budget more deeply to get a better understanding. Because when we do, you find avenues for possible change. Like there's an end goal there of like, if I can really understand this process, then I can be better equipped to affect change about
Right.
the process.
Oh my gosh, I was giving a geeky lecture to the Senate pages this week. They're kind of like interns that show up for a week from high schools across the state. And I made a point of order this week, which is like an objection to something. And I made an objection based around the House amendments to a Senate bill not being germane, which means I was saying that I didn't think they should be able to be substituted in because they were too different. And that is a rule in the Senate rules. And there's also joint rules. And I was trying to explain to those pages that I used to think the rules were kind of minutia and you didn't need to bother. But the thing is, that's your leverage. And that's how we've decided to work together. And so knowing those rules is important for leverage, especially when you're in an environment with the numbers as uneven as they are for us
Sure.
between the two parties. We don't have a lot of advantages around numbers of people.
Right.
So we have to look at the rules to try to analyze
Right.
that.
And that's successful? I feel like...
No, it got overridden. Now, it could be successful. It's possible.
Right.
There is the rule of law in that building most of the time. But one thing with the numbers we have now, our colleagues can actually override the rules anytime. They can suspend the rules
Right.
anytime they want.
Right.
As long as there's 2/3 of one party, they can suspend the rules.
Right.
So,
That was the point I was going to make, is that
Yeah.
I feel like it's like the rules are made up and the points don't matter, right? That like from whose line is it anyway?
they still have some pride in at least in the Senate side, there's kind of an upper chamber, like
Yeah.
we believe in decorum. So they don't like to break the rules or suspend the rules. They don't like when we raise those points of order. That makes them very upset because they want to think they're doing the right thing and they're following the rules.
Oh, right. So if you can point out that they're not.
Yeah, so we do have some. I mean, I'm grateful that they care to that they do believe that governance needs to have rules.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of
Yeah.
the budget. As a bridge, I want to go back to the conversation about the media coverage, and this is certainly not meant to be, down on any particular media outlet. I think, by and large, our media in Oklahoma is really great. Like,
Yeah.
we have some really outstanding independent journalism outfits, Non-Doc and Oklahoma Voice and Oklahoma Watch and the Frontier.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
People that I like literally read daily. And as I mentioned earlier, like Trace from Non-Doc was doing really excellent live tweeting the way we used to, like 6 years ago. That even self-deprecating tweets about, like he might chuckle at someone bringing up a point, and he would chuckle and then get a look from the governor or the pro tem. And I like that he like included that detail because he found it funny that someone brought up something and that disrupted the conversation a little bit. The coverage of the budget, by and large, to me, a lot of those stories were kind of the same, and I think you had the same observation, that they like the conversation has been framed as this being like a tremendous agreement that like they've pushed through, they've done it, they've forged a budget deal, and at the very end, there's like a brief comment from the other party being like, "Yeah, they did," and like they didn't ask us for input, and they missed a few details. Like it told a story that I don't feel was perhaps a complete look at what the budget is.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, a lot of times the budget ends up becoming kind of a horse race story, this versus that. And I want to back us up or, show that there's more perspectives, that it shouldn't just be about House or Senate.
Yeah.
The occasional governor thrown in. It's not a fight. It's, we're talking about people, we're talking about lives. And when things become widgets in this building, I don't think it's healthy for people. Are we solving real problems?
Right.
And then when something's a widget, when you're like, oh, I'll trade you one raising the House budget for the FFA camp, like those are not alike things. Like that is upsetting to me.
Right. That's a good point. And we mentioned who was in the room, and I just was reminded of a scene from the previous administration. Governor Fallon was in office, I think her last year, in the budget negotiations, where she said in a press conference, like they were in her conference room, the speaker and the pro tem and the A and B chairs from both chambers, and the governor and like the finance director, and then they had oil executives on the phone. Like they called Harold Hamm and the guy from Devon whose name escapes me, but she like said the quiet part out loud of like, oh yeah, well we called them to get their opinion on like raising the gross production tax. And I remember for all of us out here in the world thinking about it being like, well, what? Like
who has a voice in this process?
Right. Like it was exactly what we kind of expect happens, but it was just jarring to like hear it. So that wasn't the case, at least not in the room this year. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a rundown of like where the budget's at now?
So I have not been able to do the like big picture crunching of it, but I know generally how we come in. So we came into this fiscal year cash rich, which means we have one-time money. A lot of it's from the federal relief packages. So, federal money, we also budgeted low for a couple of years thinking that that the economy was going to tank when it didn't after the pandemic. Then tons of federal money flowed in through people and through local businesses and got spent. So that's led to a ripple effect. So we've had a surge and our economy's been in good shape. So we've had one-time money come in. That means that we don't know if it's going to come back, and we expect that things are going to flatten off or drop, right? So what we had was a ton of one-time money on the books, but not a lot of expectations that things are going to come over and over again. Right. So we went into negotiations. They started from how much are we going to agree is one-time versus recurring, as they call it. And the other big question was how much do we need to save, right? So we've had this whole savings conversation. We had a report last year from Legislative Office of Fiscal Transparency about how much we might need to save to weather a medium-sized downturn.
Right.
Nobody wants the state to be in a budget crisis if we have a 6-month downturn or something. And so they set back $1 billion in cash. That was a presumption on the Senate side from the beginning. I think the House came to that position later. Mm-hmm. So they've set a billion aside, and they didn't.
Out of this budget?
Out of this budget is one-time cash that was carried over from a prior year, mostly. And that means that House and Senate can access it to appropriate out of it at any time, essentially.
So it's
that we're
not in the rainy day
They
fund.
did not put it in permanent savings. Those rainy day funds have a lot of restrictions around how the money can be released, and so they decided to just keep it in cash. What that means is we kind of have to follow that money to see how it gets spent, make sure it gets done well.
Right.
One advantage of those permanent savings is that they're more visible when we spend out of them, right? But I think that there very much was a mentality around being cautious for the future, which some years I'm not a big fan of, but in this case we had so much one-time extra money that it actually made sense. This is the year for us to do a big thing around that. So we'll see how that goes, and then made big steps on things that cost a lot, like maintenance. Nobody wants to do maintenance. We talked about this with the Capitol. They put back $350 million for maintenance of state-owned buildings, and they're going to divvy it up between our state complexes, parks, and higher ed. And I think hopefully see us upgrading. These are state assets, and they're publicly used buildings, and if we don't actually continually upgrade them, this is the year to do that. I make a lot of pleas and beg for human investments, but I do think we still have to have functional buildings for this state, right? That was a huge investment that they made this year.
that earlier this year, Scott Nelson and I went to DC just for vacation, and one of his friends works for the State Department, and he was joking. We went did a little tour, and he was joking that in America, the State Department is just like an office building. He's like, we don't even have ceiling tiles in our office on like some of the floors. And he's like, but if you go to another country, like their foreign ministry is like marble and gold. Yeah. And he was like, it's a very different approach.
We decide what to invest in.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I first came in was after years of budget crunch and, Department of Mental Health, that director wanted to spend money on treatment. She didn't want to upgrade buildings. So you had staff that were working in bathrooms that hadn't been actually fully converted. I mean, we know this is not negligence on the part of these state agency directors. Politicians don't like to spend on maintenance. Yeah. We don't. And I read some Oklahoma history, political history, that I think it was our second budget or third budget. We actually cut all building maintenance funds to balance the budget. So we've been doing this since the beginning.
Of course we did.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But okay, so that was the revenue side. When you're taking, how much money do we actually have is where they have to start, right? If we're not going to talk about really what we dream to do as a state, which is the other way to budget, which would be to say, what do we really need in order to do a good job together and grow together? That's not how we approach it.
But I want to come back to that later in the conversation.
The next thing I'll say is that the governor from the beginning pushed agencies to submit flat budgets, which means budgets with no increase. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up, even though there's some agencies with increases, they're not much and not large. And that's a cut in this inflationary environment. So we've had 4% inflation over the last year. I mean, just if it's a 0% increase or 1% increase, that's a cut to that agency because their buying power's gone down. Right. So I have real concerns just about that premise of starting from that flat budget. And that also meant it was hard for us to get information from the state agencies about what people in Oklahoma need. Agency directors were scared because the governor was telling them to keep it flat. So they couldn't tell us, hey, we really need this much for mental health, or we really need this much for kids in the juvenile system. Mm-hmm. So we had some precarious budget meetings where those agencies are telling us what they need, but not really telling us what they need.
Right. Well, and I remember back several years ago when Joe Albaugh was in DOC, and he came in and said, I need $1 billion more. Yeah. And they were like shocked. And he was like, listen, our facilities are crumbling. We're way understaffed.
They're still crumbling.
Right. And there was it was, in my opinion, he did the right thing, but I think it was so off-putting to some of the officials.
State agency directors have an impossible task in this environment. Impossible. If they truly ask for what the people of Oklahoma need, we get mad. If they ask for nothing, we get mad. So they're trying to, I mean, I'm flattening it out. It's not mad. Sometimes it is mad. Yeah. But it's very difficult for them to find the right amount of need and urgency that also doesn't stress out the legislature and cause a rift because people think it's impossible. Yeah. It's like people who think, oh, well, we have to solve poverty to solve eviction, for instance. No, we don't. We can make improvements, right? We got to make steps towards those things. But we got to have a dream and a vision of where we're going. Are we really going to solve the problem?
Right. Right. Yeah, no, and that's a good point to bring up the dream conversation. I think I've talked about this before, but I find myself frustrated annually during the budget conversation because it's always on just 1 year, right? It is a 1 year conversation. When I think it's reasonable, we expect that the state will be around for more than 1 year. And I know that there's prohibitions on encumbering future legislatures and all that, but in Congress, as a contrast, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, scores stuff on a 10-year horizon, right? How much will this cost or bring in over the next decade? And I think that is an important shift. One, it forces you to think longer term because we will not realize the impact of some of these programs for a decade. And the difference in a tax cut that's going to cost the state $300 million this year. Well, that's $3 billion in a decade. Right. And to ask ourselves, are we willing to lose $300 million this year? Maybe. We got one-time money. Right. Are we willing to lose $3 billion over a decade?
Right. No, we don't look ahead. It makes me, I can't even tell you how frustrated I get. We are very short-sighted in that planning. And frankly, sometimes when I ask for longer-term projections, people get mad at me. We're especially talking about revenue cuts. We have to project out because we are not going to increase revenue. We're not. It's going to take drastic change in the state for people to agree that we need to increase our taxes or our fees. So we've got to be realistic about where we're going, right? And sometimes this year, for instance, the governor was quoting numbers that were only for next year's numbers. Like on the grocery sales tax
Right.
cut, he would quote that number, or the income sales tax, which is a partial year number.
Right.
And so it actually misrepresents what the cut is.
Right.
Like that grocery sales tax cut is $420 million
And yet in one of the...
in a full year.
Yeah, okay, that's right. But like in one of the news articles, it said like the impact was like 300 million, or
That's
maybe it was a press
this
release.
next fiscal year.
And
yeah.
it was in the press release that
Yeah.
they sent out.
Right.
And I was like, that's not right.
They're covering it for education. Anyway, point is, we have to look longer term. But I would say simultaneously, we don't ask agencies, and we don't have an oversight body that does long-term planning. You know, at the city level, they have a planning office that sits around and looks at 10-year demographic projections, 15, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
That happens by agency, like Department of Transportation's doing that. You see some of the other agencies doing that, but we don't have that unified look on how to project out. What are we doing down the road? Who do we want to be?
Right. Right. I mean, if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there.
Right. No, that is the frustration. Is I feel like we're taking one step at a time, and maybe this step is okay.
Yeah.
But do we know where we're going?
Right.
That's the big question.
Right. So I know some of the other highlights, bullet points from this budget was an additional $25 million for public ed or common ed.
$38 a student.
Yeah, so that's not.
I did the
money.
math because
Yeah.
I was like, I want to know how much that is per student. We need to be looking. We are not matching our neighboring states on what they spend. We're not even reaching the average for our neighboring states.
Right.
So inflation continues, and our funding levels have not increased to meet the inflation change.
And we have more kids. Like,
Right.
there's two factors, right?
No.
There is a growth of the cost, like the inflation,
100%.
the time value of money. Also, like, there's just more people.
Right. We want more kids in this state.
Right.
We want more kids. Yeah.
Which requires more money.
Right. So I will also point out, so 25 million more in the public school formula, 50 million more in private vouchers, because that was passed last year with a $50 million increase.
Wow.
So even in this year's budget, there's an inequity there on whether we're diverting money to private schools or if we're putting it to the public schools.
Right. And they will undoubtedly try to champion this and say, oh, we gave more to Common Ed. And like, they did, but very little more.
Yeah, and we don't have that automatic increase. Like, why are we having to fight for 25 million, whereas
Right.
private school vouchers went up by 50 million and are scheduled to go 50 million more the next year?
Yeah.
That's the kind of increases, percentage-wise increases that public school would do well to have in order to really plan ahead
Sure.
and serve kids well.
I don't know how many kids are in private school. I want to say it was like 36,000.
30,000-ish.
So 50 million for 30,000 kids and 25 million for like 400,000 kids or something. Like, it's a very proportionally not at all
Yeah.
the same.
Well, so we kept saying the biggest thing we could do at this point is fund enough to reduce class sizes. Now, we also need a certified educator in every classroom. That's a whole other conversation that would take the entire time, right? But it takes budgetary investments, because one of the many reasons, among the reasons that teachers are leaving is too many kids in the class, too many challenges they're dealing with in class. And we cannot, with the funding we have, get smaller class sizes. We also did not choose to fund school lunches, and we could have done universal school lunches for not much money.
Right.
That's something Senator Hicks has championed for years. That makes a difference for kids.
Yeah.
Are kids hungry when they come to school? Why are we even making this?
Right.
Watching one of my friends is going around the state giving money to eliminate lunch debt.
Yeah.
Why is there thousands of dollars of lunch debt?
Right.
It's just boggles my mind, right?
Right. No, yes, it's such a bizarre policy choice in the first place. And I don't know anyone who thinks it's a good idea, right? No one's like, everyone just
I do.
wants
I
it.
hear from people who don't.
Yeah.
No, they think once we're feeding somebody's kid that's like a dependent environment, instead of just, we're trying to make sure, if you want to look at them as a future worker, that future worker is going to do better if they're well fed while they're learning.
Sure.
But there's a feeling that we're creating a government dependency there.
Oh, right.
Rather than worrying about the hungry kids. So, which is more important to you?
Right.
Worrying about the possibility of a dependency, or having a hungry kid who also has the trauma of being hungry that's going to scar them for life.
Right. Right.
Anyway, sorry. Keep
No,
going on that.
that's bananas.
Can I tell you a bright spot?
Please.
Bright spot. We are continuing to make gains for the developmental disabilities waiting list.
Yes.
So when that huge influx went in to try to eliminate the wait list, it was not very realistic, because service providers have been flooded, right? They were not ready. Sometimes in government, if you move too fast, that actually is very tough on a system. Service providers weren't able to hire fast enough or grow fast enough to serve people with developmental disabilities. This is about keeping loved ones out of institutions, which I think we all know is better, generally better for people. Not always. Sometimes people need institutions, but keeping them in their families, and it costs the state less than sending someone to a nursing care or to a care facility, right? So what we've seen is after COVID, they haven't been able to hire. I mean, people in direct care for people with disabilities and for seniors are getting paid like $9 an hour, right? And right now that environment doesn't exist, right? So this year we put in money to increase rates, 25% increase on rates for developmental disabilities, 10% for all people working with aging. I'm glad because I think it's showing a realistic view that we have to keep improving that workforce if we're gonna make progress on this and actually serve people.
Yeah. That's a huge
deal. I'm pleased. Yeah, it's not only we're using money, we're using some carryover money and continuing to work the waiting list so that people aren't waiting for services.
Right.
Because people go into crisis. You have a family, they have a loved one who has some pretty severe needs, or you have aging parents with a child with disabilities who grows into an adult with disabilities. You know, when they're aging, that's a lot of times when there's crisis.
Yeah.
And of course, when they leave high school, you know, there's a huge crisis because the K through 12 system helps support people.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
and if you want to keep them working, you know, if in our state we want more people working to increase our economy, we need to have better care situations for people.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, because it helps both the individual and their caregivers.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
That's
anyway, that one's we're making progress. So that's about 48 million in the budget.
Yeah.
Overall, I was pleased. That's something I'm pleased with. And Representative Hafner's been working really hard to try to make sure everyone's using real information.
Yeah.
Working on this stuff.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
Has and this is probably a process note, but the budget as of today, we're recording this on the May 24th. The budget is not in law yet.
Thank you so much. So here's where we are. Because we waited so late, because the Republican leadership waited so late to finalize this deal, and they're all blaming each other for that. We are now going to meet on Memorial Day to vote on the bills for the first time in committee.
So that you can get done by...
So we can get done by sine die.
Yeah.
May 31st, 5 p.m. is sine die. That means we have to end.
Right.
Constitutionally. So anything that doesn't get done before then doesn't get done.
Right.
Unless we go a special session.
And it has to do committee floor.
If we're following the rules, yes. So committee will all happen at once. JCAB is joint.
Oh, that's
so
right.
Even though we meet separately, it can happen simultaneously with the other. And then Senate bills would come from the Senate, House bills would come from the House, and then they'll cross over.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that usually takes like a minimum of...
Usually 5 days.
5 days,
yeah,
right.
Usually 5. We're looking at Monday's going to be JCAB, Tuesday the general appropriation... Tuesday the general appropriation bill on the floor of the Senate. There'll be other JCAB bills in the House. Wednesday, the bills will cross over, so we'll be doing other business, presumably. Hopefully not horrible conference committee reports.
Yep.
Thursday, they'll switch over. So the general appropriations bill will be in the House, and that's the bill that has most of the numbers in it.
Right.
And then it should go to the governor on Friday.
And part of the agreement here, and then we mentioned the governor in passing, but part of the agreement that was reached was that the governor would not, he pledged not to line item veto anything in the budget if he had some things that were included. And that is just a play to avoid a special session about the budget, right?
Yeah.
They want to get done.
I mean, we for years, I think, have tried to avoid, if we pass it before session ends, the governor has to veto or sign it within 5 days.
Right.
And if we're out, he gets 15 days and he can pocket veto stuff.
Right.
And we can't come back and override.
Right.
So as kind of insurance policy, the legislatures wanted to leave that 5 day period. Last year, we just overrode everything. He vetoed a bunch of stuff.
Yep.
We overrode it because they allowed enough time in there.
Has he ever signed the budget since he's been in office?
Huh?
Has the governor signed the budget since he's been in office?
Yeah. I don't remember
Couple
exactly which years, but
Yeah.
he did.
Let's say the last few years he's just either
Right.
pocket signature or vetoed and been overridden. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
It was interesting just watching, and I think I've seen the phrase land the plane 10 times in the last 2 days, but even in yesterday's meeting, he came in, or Wednesday's meeting, he came in and was like, okay, well, here's what I want, and I'll leave you to it, and left the room.
And he came back in to shake hands.
Yeah.
And take a selfie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this year, and this is probably because the governor's been in 6 years now. I mean, I think he was real involved his first year, and got involved his second year, and I think they got crossways.
Yep.
And I think finding that, I mean, you've seen governors over the years try to find that way to work together, and I think he finally just was like, I'm going to ask for a few things and then get out of the way. But I don't know. I don't know what his thought process is, but I know the legislature's kind of not paid attention to his budget for a few years. And I noticed they've de-emphasized it from the governor's side, too.
Sure. Well, and I think this is, for me, this is a limitation of our current balance of power, right? Is that there's a lack of accountability. So that even in right now, right, both chambers and the governor's office are all controlled by the same party. Mm-hmm. And but because the legislature, because the Republicans have super majorities in both chambers, they can do whatever they want. And that means they can override the governor as long as they've got the votes, right?
Right.
And so even in a state where we have a weak governorship by design, but it's like even weakened more because he doesn't really come from a strong negotiating standpoint.
Right. Yeah, they just need 32 in the Senate to override, which is 2/3. So, and there's only 8 Democrats right now.
Right.
Yeah. So there has to be division in the Republican caucus to not have that work out. Now, overrides, it's always risky.
Right.
It's more risky.
Right.
We have a couple of bills that I guess they're looking at overriding, but it's a big conversation on what's worth it.
Sure. And I think this is more of like just a political conversation, but I if I was governor in this situation, and thank goodness I'm not, but like it seems like it would be advantageous for the governor to build tight relationships with just enough legislators, even in one chamber, to prevent veto overrides, right? Like as an insurance policy for yourself, if you've got, if he had policy outcomes he really wanted, like, and I don't know that he's done that or not done that really. But
I think at various times he has, maybe not this year.
So next week y'all come back and JCAB, which as opposed to previous years, I would think should be smoother, right?
We've had such intense JCAB, past appropriations meetings and public meetings that, I don't have a lot of questions.
Right.
I have a lot of questions about whether we're truly solving problems with a lot of the money, and if it's truly, there are some very political decisions in there. There's definitely a favoring of big business tax breaks, some of the credits and stuff. There's definitely a leaning towards those supporting big business. So that's disappointing. But I don't have a ton of questions because I now know the backstory and the context for everything, which I think is good. I represent 83,000 people. I appreciate that opportunity. So I don't know what we'll need to ask Senator Hall at this point.
Right.
But we'll see.
Well, and I worry on behalf of my fellow voters, right, that we are, or advocates or whatever, those of us who pay attention to the budget more, I worry that we are, it's not, complacent's not the right word, but satisfied by an absence of cuts, right?
Our standards are low.
Right.
They are.
Compared to 2016, 2017, when it was a real crisis and we were
I agree.
Trying to fight for our lives.
We've been talking about this in caucus too. I would say this year's process too kind of threw us off because one of our major critiques in the past is focused around transparency because there's so much you could cover in terms of details of the budget that's not okay and basis and ideas. We focus on transparency a lot. So now they've responded to that. I think next year it's an opportunity for advocates to engage earlier because I don't know if people knew how to trust that system or how to engage. But when the first numbers were released from agencies, a lot of groups started advocating. Right? So they gave those first budget line items from the Senate. I don't know if people knew that was going to be real, but it was. And so what change happened from there to the next proposal was really important. And I think now if we can rely on that, if Senator McCourtney as new pro tem, sticks with that process, I think people start to understand when to engage. Because before you basically just were shouting into the wind and didn't know if anyone was going to listen to you till a hot bill came into committee.
Right.
Well, now in theory you could know earlier, okay, we want this, and then you could see in April at least what's been outlined, and then you know where we're starting from. We really stuck with our positions that came out of the Senate to start with. A lot. So I would say that's going to be really important for advocates to be involved before the Senate makes their first plan. I don't know. I'll be curious and to see what, when Speaker Hilbert starts, how they'll work together. They're whip smart guys. Very interested to see how they work.
Well, so I was going to kind of transition to that as we wrap up for today. But once we get past the budget, then this session's done. and it's an election year.
It is.
And then we come back next year with new leadership in both chambers. And this will be the first time since Let's Fix This has been around that we've had a change, because McCall and Treat have been in their positions for this long. And I'm very interested. And I'm probably like equal parts curious and worried, just because that's I like the hedge, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know McCourtney a little bit. Like, he's been on the show a few times, and I've had a chance to engage with him. I don't know Hilbert at all, just from what I've heard. But what do you think? How do you? Not that you've got a magic 8-ball for the future. You'll be in leadership, which is exciting. But what do you see? What do you think is going to change? What if you had to look at that?
I mean, I'll be really interested to see what processes. I have good relationships with Senator McCourtney and Representative Hilbert. Hilbert is just whip smart. I mean, he's such a quick study. He's really interesting for that. I was on the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Committee with him, and so spent a lot of time with him and saw how he works, which he's going to come up with a plan really fast, and he's very strategic about it. So he's going to be looking ahead really quickly, I bet. So he'll be interesting. And then Leader McCourtney has been floor leader for years, is very sharp. He, believes in the rule of law, so that's good. And he holds his cards pretty close to his chest, so I think that'll be interesting for people. I don't know that he'll come out like Treat with a big agenda publicly. So I think that'll be a little more, people won't know where he stands on things sometimes. But I find him to be a very fair person, so I feel good about that. Like, that was an important thing. Whatever I disagreed with Pro Tem Treat about, he truly understood the minority party had an important position within this state government. They have been very respectful about allowing us to do questions. And, I say that and people are like, oh, that's a low bar. Yeah, agreed. But there were times way in the past when the supermajority Dems didn't let them ask questions in committee and stuff. Well, that's not okay. I mean, we all represent people. The people deserve to have those questions asked. So Pro Tem Treat was very supportive of that and was very respectful, especially during like redistricting, et cetera, in terms of communicating with us. So I hope that continues. Certainly that's my experience of Senator McCourtney so far. I'll be curious with Leader Munson and Representative Hilbert, because I mean, what awesome young energy and like interesting people. So we all four got together once already, and it was kind of fun. I just was like, let's get together, because I feel like we're going to be thrown together, like it or not, and so like,
it's going to be y'all at the table next year, right?
Right. Well, and there's a lot more House versus Senate sometimes than there is even partisan stuff. They really, I don't think people can understand unless they're up here how divided we are between the two chambers.
There's a line, I think it's from The West Wing, where Leo says, they're not the enemy. Like, the other party's not the enemy. They're the opposition. The enemy is the Senate, or whatever.
That's been said in the state government too.
Interesting. Well, I think I'm excited. Just I appreciate the change, and
there's my fabulous executive assistant leaving for the day.
Oh, goodbye, Elizabeth.
She's been answering constituent emails all day long. She is the best at making sure we're responsive and on the ball. So I'll go look, and she'll have a bunch primed for me to check over and add to. I love it.
That's awesome.
Just want to tell you, there's real people answering the phone and answering emails. So when you call, you're talking to somebody who can actually listen to you.
Yeah, that's true. Just the other day, someone was asking me about how that works, and they're like, is that a job that you can apply for? I said, absolutely. It's not.
Not a lot of people turn over. I think that there's a lot of folks who've worked up there 20 years. But there's definitely
thank
jobs.
God, because we need their.
I know, we need that expertise. Truly, like, the functions up here can be very confusing. So I'm so honored to have a fabulous teammate.
Who's your office mate right now?
Senator Hicks.
Okay, that's all right. Just make sure that hadn't changed.
Yeah.
Senator Kirt, it's been lovely to have you.
Great
Thank
to
you so
be
much
here.
for being here. Thanks
Absolutely.
for coming with the budget. I know that and I'm sure our listeners will be paying close attention next week as this kind of gets finalized, and as those final numbers come back. I agree with your sentiment. I remember a year not that long ago where the budget was passed and no one really knew what it was, and that was on Thursday or Friday, and then on Sunday when the newspaper came out and had all the numbers, I was at my parents' house reading the newspaper, and like looking at Twitter, and everyone collectively saying, oh my God. Like, they really gutted some of this stuff, zeroed out agencies, made mistakes. There was like math errors in it. And I feel like this year has been
we can help double check those things.
Right.
Why not?
That.
Why not?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Listeners, thank you for being here. As always, this is an excellent reminder that decisions are made by those who show up. Not just elected officials, but us as voters. If you'd like to show up and help create more voters, recruit more voters, we just posted like 6 or 8 or 10 upcoming voter registration events. There's something every month through the end of the year, and we're adding more and more all the time. We need volunteers. We have an ambitious goal of registering 25,000 new voters this year, and there's the only way we can hit that is from help, people like you. So please, please, please come. It's fun. To be outside, you can meet people. Conversations are always interesting. I just printed a bunch of new voter reminder cards. I'll show you later. They're really rad. And we're excited to help hand those out and make sure that voters are aware of the upcoming elections. So please, please, just go to our website, letsfixthis.org, click on Get Involved, and go to the calendar there. It's a great way to find out what's happening. And on that note, I guess that's it. All right. Have a great week.
Bye.